Shalom, shalom, shalom. All praises to the Most High, Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, which is to say in the Paleo Hebrew, Yahweh, which is the name of our Heavenly Father, meaning He is, Bahashim, which means in the name, Yahweh Shai, which means He is our salvation. And those are who the world ignorantly calls God, the Heavenly Father, and Jesus, His only begotten Son, who, by the way, only came for the Israelites. Which brings us to our discussion / topic tonight. Did Boaz marry a Israelite woman from the land of Reuben that was once part of the entire land of Moab, but through conquering was later given to the tribe of Reuben? Or did Boaz marry a natural-born Moabite by blood? Okay? And we're going to look into it a little bit in this lesson, all right? Now, as you can see on your screen, there's two pictures of what appears to be so-called black woman, or could be an Israelite, and then what appears to be a so-called Chinese woman, what could be a Moabite, all right? So this is the question that is being given. Did Boaz marry an Israelite or a natural-born Moabite, all right? This is the question that's been presented, okay? That's a good word. And we're going to have to remember this right here when we read Ruth 1:16, okay? Because in the King James Version, the word shall be, which is italicized, is not there in the original text or manuscript. And I Googled it, and I said, would Ruth 1:16 pretty much read as such, thy people, my people? An AI overview said this: in the King James Version Bible, the phrase in question reads, thy people shall be my people, all right? Because I was going back and forth with AI for the longest, and they was using words like proselyte or conversion and using this scripture to show that Ruth converted to being an Israelite by adopting to the ways of the Israelites, all right? And this is one of the key verses. So it says, in the King James Version, KJV of the Bible, the phrase in question reads, thy people shall be my people, showing the willingness of Ruth wanting to adopt or to convert to the Israelites, all right? So this is how it's presented. It says, in thy God, my God, showing even more that she's willing to serve the God of the Israelites, all right? So that is how it is presented. But we're going to read it as it is. It says, the italicized words in many English Bibles translations, including the KJV or the King James Version, are words that were added by the translators to make the English flow naturally, all right? And the words shall be are what? Italicized, meaning that they were added to make the words flow more easily in the English, but they're not there in the manuscripts, okay? It says they were added by the translators to make the English flow naturally, as they are implied in the original Hebrew, but not explicitly presented, all right? And those words shall be are not presented in the Hebrew. It says, if you were to read Ruth 1:16, remember this, so when we come across this, when we read this, you can understand how it's supposed to be read. It says, if you were to read Ruth 1:16 without the italicized words shall be, the phrase would read, thy people, my people. Okay, because why? As we're going to read and find out a little bit later, Ruth was indeed an Israelite, all right, who just so happened to be living in the land of Reuben that conquered the Amorites that had conquered prior the Moabites. Okay, so she was living in the plains of Moab, all right, which at one point in time was inhabited by the Amorites, who, when they came into power, smote or killed all of the Moabites in that region. All right. Therefore, hindering or rendering any Moabites that could have been in that part of region where Ruth was. Okay. So it says, the sentence where we at, it says, as they are implied, the original Hebrew, but not explicitly presented. If you were to read Ruth 1:16 without the italicized word shall be, the phrase would read, thy people, my people. Okay. Indicating or showing you that Ruth was an Israelite. Okay. From the tribe of Reuben. It says, in thy power, my power. As we're going to look into that a little bit more when we read the, chapter. It says the sentence still conveys the complete meaning intended by the original text in Hebrew. Well, if you say that, then there wouldn't be speculations or, ideas of Ruth being a Moabite. Okay? So I have taken a picture of that exact verse in the word in the King James Version, and we're going to look at it right here. So as you can see, it says, and Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee or return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people, as you can see, shall be is in italicized, my people. So you take the word shall be out, and it will read, thy people, my people, and thy God, my God. As we're going to look into that a little bit later as well. Okay. So you see the shall be is in italicized. All right. And this is in the book of Ruth. Okay. So now, with that being said, let's go to the map and let's look at the tribe of Reuben. Okay. Because as you can see, Moab is south of the tribe of Reuben, which is split between the Arnon River, all right? And north of that is where Ruth was, located in the plains of Moab, okay? Which were later conquered by the Amorites, which were then later conquered by the Israelites, which then Reuben and Gad stayed in that part, whereas you can see the other tribes, Judah, Dan, Manasseh, Zebulun, Naphtali, Asher, they spread it out. But Gad and Reuben stayed in the land of Moab, in particular the plains of Moab, which where Ruth was from. Okay? So let's see. Yeah, and then that's the computer. I was asking it so many questions, it started to malfunction, okay? It asked me, was I a robot, man? Because I was asking it so many questions. It just went into overload. It couldn't keep up because it was keep telling me that Ruth was a Moabite. No matter how much evidence and, scripture was brought out, how as that, Boaz was an Israelite, and the law or the Torah says that thou should not allow a Moabite to enter into the congregation 10 generations, which is forever. So then how could Boaz marry Ruth if she was, according to AI Overview, a bloodline, natural born Moabite? And they kept saying because she believed, because she was converted. And they used that verse, Ruth 1:16, as one of the core principles to show that she was a proselyte or she converted. which that's not what it was talking about, okay? And we're going to get into it as we go on in this lesson, all right? So let's go to Ruth 1 and let's start from the top. So this is the book of Ruth, chapter 1 and verse 1. As the subtitle says, Naomi, widow, all right? Now it reads, now it came to pass in the days when the judges, remember that word, judges, okay, rule. This is in the time of the judges, okay? And as we know, there's multiple words in the Hebrew that could mean judges. And one of those words is what? Gods or God. That's a word that means judge, as we're going to look into that word in the Hebrew. It says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges or the gods ruled, that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now we're going to come to find out that one of these 2 sons married Ruth and the other one married Orpah, all right? And then Ruth later was given to Boaz because why? Her first husband, Mahan, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to read it, he died, okay? And there was no near kinsman to him, and that's how Boaz was able to marry Ruth, all right? She was indeed an Israelite. So it says, verse 2, and the name of the man was Elimelech, which was Naomi's husband, and the name of his wife, Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. All right, Mahlon married Ruth and Chilion married Orpah. It says, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judea, and they came unto the country of Moab. See, at this time, it was Reuben that had what? Taken that land and possessed it, as we showed in the map. Because why? The Israelites had taken that land from the Amorites, all right? King Sihon, to be precise. And he had taken that land from the Moabites, all right? And he smote every one. So there were no more Moabites in that region, that part of land, in that part of Moab. It says, and the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judea, and they came into the country of Moab. Remember that, all right? They came into the country of Moab. It says, and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, which made her a widow, and she was left and her 2 sons. It says, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. So her 2 sons took them wives of the women of Moab. All right. Now that's another crucial point of knowing if whether or not Ruth was a natural born Moabite or was she an Israelite of the land of Moab. Okay. Now when we look up this phrase woman of Moab, it's different or separate from if you look up the phrase daughter of Moab, all right? When you look up that word daughter of Moab, particularly how it's used in that phrase Moab, it's speaking of descendants or bloodline of Moab. Now, when we look up women of Moab, it refers to who? The inhabitants or citizens. Now, this is the only time throughout the Bible that you will see women of Moab, okay? Matter of fact, let's just type it in and see. Women of Moab. And it's only one time that it's used in that way, and that's Ruth 1 and 4, which we are currently at. Now, when we go and look up this word Moab that was preceded by women of, we're going to see what the translation, or should I say the interlinear meaning of that word Moab is, where it says of the woman of Moab. We go into that
Strong's H 4125. Moavi. Moavi. Gesenius Lexicon. Moav. Moav.
Now, when we go down to the outline of biblical usage, these are some of the ways that it is used. Moabite equaling from father, what father? Now, here it is. Letter A. And citizen of Moab, which Ruth was, okay? An inhabitant of the land of Moab, which she was, okay? She just lived in that part of Moab that was once called Moab, but at that time it was inhabited by who? The tribe of Reuben. Okay, they had taken over that land from who? The Amorites. Okay, now in the sense that if Ruth was indeed a bloodline Moabite, as they say her and Orpah was, it would use this terminology or phrase. Let's go there. Daughter of Moab. Let's see. Daughters of Moab. We have Numbers 25 and Isaiah 16 and 2. All right, let's go to Numbers 25 and 1. And let's look up the word Moab in this regards to daughters of Moab. We're going to go to the interlinear. We're going to scroll down to where it says the daughters of Moab. We're going to click on 4124. And although it says Moab of his father, there's no question mark. Because why? It says A son of Lot by his eldest daughter. B, the nation descended from the son of Lot. C, the land inhabited by the descendants of the son of Lot. Right. These are the natural born or bloodline descendants of Lot, the Moabites. All right. Which Ruth was not called a daughter or daughters with her and Orpah of Moab. They were called what? Women of Moab, showing that they were residing in that land that was once inhabited by Moab. All right. But then Moab got, resorted down to what? Having that territory south of the Arnon River. All right. Now let's go to what was the other one? Isaiah 16 and 2. This is Isaiah 16 and 2. The daughters of Moab. Okay. We're going to go to the interlinear. We're going to scroll down to the daughters of Moab, and it's going to say the same thing. Okay. A son of Lot by his eldest daughter, the nation. See, the daughter of Moab are women that are from the nation or bloodline, the lineage, the patrilineal lineage of who? Moab, because it says the nation descended from the son of Lot. Okay. It says a son of Lot by his eldest daughter. So these are the actual Moabites, all right? The descendants, okay? The women of Moab, all right? The daughters of Moab. So back to Ruth 1 and verse 4, where it picks up and says that they were the women of Moab, not the daughters of Moab. It says, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. Okay, it could have said daughters of Moab if indeed Ruth and Orpah were truly indeed descendants of Lot, women of Moab. But it said women of Moab. That's one telling sign. It says the name of the one was Orpah and the name of the other Ruth. Okay. And they dwelt there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them. So now they both were widows, okay? Ruth and Orpah, okay? Which was her sister-in-law through what? through marriage. Because why? Naomi and her husband had 2 sons, and her 2 sons married each one of them a woman of Moab, that being Ophrah and who? Ruth, but were both Israelites. It says, then she arose with her daughters-in-law. Did I skip one? Did I skip 5? And Mela and Chilion died also. No, I think I read that. And the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Right, so the woman, Naomi, she didn't have her 2 sons because they died, or her husband. It says, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, because they had went there. Okay? Who? Her husband and her 2 sons. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that Yahweh had visited his people and given them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. Right, Bethlehem, Judah. That's what it was, right? Bethlehem, Judah. So it says, where we at? Verse 7, wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return each to her mother's house. Yahweh deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. Verse 9, Yahweh grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lift up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. So they wanted to go back with her to her people, which were who? The tribe of Judah, okay? And Bethlehem of Judah. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? See? So it says, turn again, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have an husband, if I should say, I have hope if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons. So not only does she have to have a husband, but then she has to have sons, okay? And that's not the end of it. Wait till she says this. It says, would you tarry for them till they were grown? And then on top of that, you would have to wait until they are grown. It says, 13, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Right. So she's asking, would you wait for them to have husbands? To be, betrothed and given, and you be given it to them. So she's pretty much telling them that go your way. Okay. It says, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of Yahweh is gone out against me. Verse 14, Ruth's loyalty. And this is where AI was really going off, man, because it was trying to say that Ruth converted, or Ruth was a proselyte, or what have you. And remember what I showed you in Ruth 1:16 shall be. It says, and they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Ophrah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. So Ruth wanted to stay no matter what. Okay, Ophrah, she kissed her and she went on about her way. It says, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is going back unto her people and unto her gods. Now, remember when we first read up earlier that this was the what? Let's read that. 1. It says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. So Ruth was taking place during the time of what? The judges. And what's another word of judges? Gods. See? So AI was conflicting this verse because it says, and they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And then it says 15, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is going back into her people and unto her gods. So they look at that and they say, see, she went back into her gods, okay? But when we look up this word gods in the Hebrew, it has another meaning than what you just believe it might be, all right? This is the Hebrew word for gods, is Elohim. And look what it says, rulers, judges, okay? This is not far-fetched to believe that the gods in this verse is referring to what? The judges are rulers, because we read up in verse 1 that this was the time of what? Judges, okay? Ruth was written in the time of judges. So now when we go back to this, it says, thy sister-in-law is going back into her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. See? So that's all she was saying, that what? There was judges set up throughout each tribe, okay? From the tribe of Gad, Reuben, Manasseh, Issachar, Judah, so on and so forth, all right? Not that she returned back to the gods of Moab, okay? And that's how AI was presenting the question that I was asking, that Ruth was being converted because she didn't want to turn back to the gods of Moab. And I said, where does it explicitly say that in the Bible, that Ruth, worshiped the gods of Moab? And they couldn't come up with the answer for that, because there is no answer. All right. So it says, return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Okay? So Ruth was really, enamored with Naomi. She really, loved Naomi. All right? Now, remember what we talked about and discussed about what the italicized word shall be. So when we read this, it shouldn't be a surprise to you. So it says, I will lodge thy people, how it should be written, thy people, my people. All right? Showing you that what? They were all Israelites. All right? But because the translators added the word shall be, which we saw in the King James Version Bible, which was italicized, we looked it up to say that what? It's supposed to make the English flow more fluently. It messes up the people's understanding, because now it's giving the understanding of this terminology or reading right here. I will lodge, thy people shall be my people. See? And it even messed up with AI overview understanding, because it was trying to say that Ruth was trying to say that she wanted to convert into Naomi people and worship the Israelite God. Okay? This is what the AI overview kept doing, and I kept throwing back, questions to it until it thought I was a robot, and it just shut down, as you saw. It just gave me all that it said, we cannot deal with this no more. Because I basically went back and forth with it for about a good 30, 40 minutes. Until the conclusion was that they just asked me, was I a robot? Okay? Because why? Their understanding is loosely based on the Talmud, okay, and Judaism, all right, not the Holy Bible. So it says, I will lodge, and it's supposed to say, thy people, my people, and thy judges or rulers, my judges or rulers, okay? Because as we're going to see, look up this word God, okay? Now, it could mean divine ones, but it also has another meaning, which is what? H430, Elohim.
Strong's H430, entry 1. Eloach. Second entry, Elohim. And the third entry, Eloach.
So check this out. Look at the definition for this. A, rulers, judges. Okay? This is what's going on, all right? She wanted to be, with Naomi and, which is her people, which are the Israelites, but she wanted to be what? In the land of who? Judah. Under the judges of who? Judah. The gods, okay? The rulers, okay? So now when we go back, and it's the same thing for where it says, and thy God or judge or rulers my God, okay? But Naomi didn't have any other sons for her to marry, okay? Which is why, she told her to sleep at the foot of Boaz, okay? And the next kinsman-in-law, she didn't have any, so that's how she was able to marry Boaz, all right? As you read in the 4th chapter. So it says, and Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people. But we know it reads without the italicized words, shall be thy people, my people. And thy judge or rulers, my judge and rulers. All right? Because why? The Hebrew words has more than one meaning. All right? It's just the way the translators wrote it down or translated. Okay? This is why we have to sometimes look into the Hebrew. Also the Greek. Okay? Because if you just take it at face value, you can run with it and it may last for a while, but then, it could conflict with other parts of the word if you don't really take your time to, have a better understanding about it. All right? So this is the exact thing that was going on in the time of Ruth, which was what? That she was an Israelite that was living at once what was known as the plain of Moab, but at that time was occupied and taken over by the Israelites, particularly the tribe of Reuben. She was an Israelite. All right. Now, if we go into Deuteronomy 23, furthermore, it says what? Deuteronomy 23 and 3. It says, an Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of Yahweh forever. So we see that a Moabite is not supposed to enter into the congregation of the Israelite, all right? So they're not supposed to marry, okay? What's that word? Moabite? A citizen of Moab, an inhabitant of the land of Moab, okay? So it says that what? A citizen, or it says from father. What father? So we know that because you trace, see, there's no such thing as a mixed race. That's another thing that these so-called 48ers, they'll tell you that there's such thing as mix. All right, your mother could be a so-called Jewish woman, and your father could be a so-called, Chinese man. And then they'll trace the lineage through the mother. No, the lineage is traced through who? The father. Okay? You can read that in Numbers 1 and 18. All right? That's how you trace the lineage. It's through the father's line, not the mother's line. And in doing so, there's no such thing as a mixed race. Okay? So when it's saying a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation, that's speaking of one through the father. Because if you got a Moabite mother and an Israelite father, you are an Israelite. All right? It's just that simple. Okay? It's just that simple. So it says, verse 3, an Ammonite or a Moabite. This is speaking of the man. Now, it told me, I said, how can you justify this? And it gave me Deuteronomy 25 and 5, talking about the what did it say? The Levirate law, something like that. No, man. It goes through the patrilineal lineage. It does not go, the Bible does not deal with the lineage of the woman, man. You trace the seed through the lineage of the father. Okay? So a Moabite or Ammonite man is what determines the seed, because you can have a Moabite man, which Moabites are the modern day Chinese people. You can have a Moabite or Chinese man, and he can marry an Israelite woman, and that child would not be permitted into the congregation. Because why? It's a Moabite. Now, if you flip it around the other way, and you had an Israelite man who married a Moabite or Chinese woman, that child would be permitted into the congregation, because why? They are an Israelite. All right? It's just that simple. So an Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh, even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of Yahweh forever. So if Ruth was a Moabite by blood, how would she enter into the congregation? She wouldn't. And then that's when AI overview said, well, she was a proselyte. She was a convert. It was a specific case. There was a loophole in the law of Moses. No, there wasn't no loophole, because why? She was an Israelite. All right? She was an Israelite from the tribe of Reuben. Okay? By blood. She was not a natural born Moabite, or else she wouldn't have been able to enter into the congregation by marriage, or else Boaz, hey, he transgressed against the law. Now, if I'm wrong, I apologize, go off, and I'll not teach this anymore. Okay? I'm not saying I'm above reproach or reprove or whatever, but how could Ruth, if she was a natural born blood Moabite, enter into the congregation? If her father's father went back all the way into Moab, how could she enter to the congregation? It says 10 through their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of Yahweh forever. See? So did Boaz marry a Israelite woman that lived in what was once part of the whole territory of Moab, that was later conquered by the Amorites, King Zion, and then later conquered by the Israelites, where then Reuben stayed? Or did Boaz marry a natural born by blood Moabite woman? Okay? And I think the overwhelming evidence, at least according to the scriptures, says that Boaz married an Israelite woman from the tribe of Reuben that was living in the plains of Moab, north of the Arnon River, which the Israelites conquered from the Amorites and took over. And that was the part of the land that Ruth was from. Okay? She was without a doubt an Israelite. All right? And like I said, if I'm wrong, I stand corrected. Okay? There's no pride whatsoever. Okay? There's no pride whatsoever. If I'm wrong, I stand corrected. Just, show me my error. Show me my ways that I'm erring in. All right? So I also want to show this last, is it trying to see if I can find it. You know what? Let me put king in front of this. I did want to show how King Zion did destroy all of the Moabites in that land that was later conquered by the Israelites that Reuben stayed in, to show that how there was no possibility of Moab being left behind in that part of the land or region. And how it's in, I think this may be it. Deuteronomy 3, verse 33. And they turned and went up by the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, went out against them, he and all his people, to the battle of Edrei. And Yahweh said unto Moses, fear him not, for I have delivered him into thy hand, and all his people and his land. And thou shalt do to him as thou didst unto Sihon, king of the Amorites, which dwelt at Heshbon. So they smote him and his sons and all his people until there was none left him alive, and they possessed his land. All right. I don't think that's it, but the point is that Sihon had, let me see if I can Google this. Now that I'm here, let me see, you want it King Sihon? I'm going to say Moabites. North of the Arnon River, which was where the plains of Moab is, where Ruth resided. Let me see, spell it correct. Arnon River. Let's see what AI says. Numbers 21 and 26. It says, this is we just in the same book, but up a few verses. It says, for Heshbon was the city of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab, and taken all his land out of his hand, even unto Arnon. See? So he took all the land, even unto Arnon. So when you look up that map that we showed you, that was occupied by Reuben and Gad, that was once part of Moab, but Zion, the king of the Amorites, took that land from Moab. And then what happened? Later, the Israelites took that land from Sihon, okay? And when Sihon came into that land, he smote everyone in it, okay? Let me do this right here. think we read 26. We might have to wrap it up. Right, so it just says for the conclusion, verse 29, woe to thee, Moab, thou art undone, O people of Chemosh. He have given his sons that escape and his daughters into captivity unto Sihon, king of the Amorites. We have shot at them. Heshbon is perished even unto Dibon, and we have laid them waste even unto Nophath, which reacheth unto Medeba. Thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites. All right. So the point is being made that Ruth was just in what was called the plains of Moab, or the country of Moab, which at one point in time was actually inhabited by actual Moabites, but through different conquerors, they was pushed out further south below the Arnon River. And that land that was north of the Arnon River was all inhabited at that time by Israelites. All right. And to the east of that were who? The Amorites. All right. If I'm not mistaken now. All right. So the point being made that Ruth was an Israelite. All right. That they described living in the country or plain or region of that which is Moab. All right. Because it was once part of Moab. All right. But as wars and battles took place, the land was transferred into another hand, until the Israelites took over that land. All right. So don't get tripped up because it says woman of Moab. All right. When it was just showing that that's where she stayed at, that part of land. Okay. That part of the region. All right. She stayed there. Because why? She was an Israelite, all right? And Reuben had took claim to that land. She was a Reubenite, all right? Which is why the next kinsman would have been what? One from her same tribe, but she wanted to be what? One of the tribe of Judah. That's why she said to Naomi, thy people, my people, because they're both Israelites, thy God, my God, all right? Nothing more, nothing less. All right. Ruth was an Israelite. All right. So let's go ahead and finish up and close out with 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. And it reads, be sober, be vigilant. See? Because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Right. And that's why you got to be very mindful of these other, what am I looking for? These other books like the Talmud and these other ideologies like Judaism, because they can lead you astray. All right. They can lead you astray. And when I'm coming to realization and to find out that this AI, Google in particular, they're backed by these small hats. All right. These 1948ers. I strongly believe that you got to jump through hoops just to even come close to them acknowledging that we the Israelites, that certain things of the Bible aren't taken in literal sense. They jump through hoops because why? They want to try to pretty much push the narrative that anyone that believes can be converted and be an Israelite. All right. They use the same, what's the word I'm looking for? They use the same rhetoric or the same argument with Cornelius, okay? And we know Cornelius was an Israelite, all right? But see, I'm starting to see the pattern, man. This AI Google madness, it's being ran by the 1948ers, if you get my drift, all right? So-called Christianity, so-called, Judaism. This is why they had those 1,000 pastors come over there to the land to get them recalibrated so they can be what? Unofficial, what was the word they used? Unofficial ambassadors, all right? It's becoming clearer and clearer, all right, that we already know who behind this, all right? as it says, Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked, man. These damn Amalekites, man, they behind it. All right, they control Google. All right, they're not gonna just come out forthright and tell you that. That's why you got to do your research, And I took it to the utmost degree where they said, "Are you a robot?" And pretty much, I forgot what question I asked them, but it was something along the law of the Torah. Then when I said Moses, it just the computer, the phone, it just showed you that message. All right. So it's evident who's behind it, man. All right. And they don't want to, be forthcoming with the truth. All right. They hide behind this Talmud, which I heavily believe they're using this, that book to back up a lot of their substantial claims that they use in AI. All right. I believe it's pegged to that Talmud, man. All right. Where they reverence the mother as being the one that carries, the lineage. All right. When there's nothing in the Bible that states that. All right. But not to make not to keep making a story longer than it has to be. We're going to wrap it up. So we're going to read this verse one more time and then we're going to close it out. This is 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. It reads, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil," you see, he going to keep going up until the end. It says, "as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." Right. He's going to get you. If you're not studying to show yourself approved, man, He's not going to give you it. He's not going to give you the answers just like that. All right. This is why the Lord set up pastors that's going to feed us according to his heart. All right. And then we can do what? Further research. All right. But just to believe Esau, Edom at his word, at face value, you'll be sadly mistaken, man. So we got to continue to do our due diligence. All right. And work, study to show thyself approved. A workman not to be ashamed of his work, rightfully dividing the truth. All right. And if you wrong and you've been found to go off, just address the situation and get on about your business, man. All right. We here to do the work. All right. By all means necessary and to endure unto the end. Okay. So with that being said, pray someone was edified through this lesson. And until the next time, if it be the Lord's will, stay strong, stay in the faith. We're almost home. Shalom. Peace.